Good day, everybody. I hope you're having a great day. We got a beautiful day here in Colorado. I have some late October, early November Indian summer weather going on. It's pretty nice. In the garage today with Savannah, and I want to go over probably one of the most often asked questions about this car, and it leads into questions about just wheels and tires in general. But what is the wheel and tire size and spacing for the wheels? So let's just get right into that. First things first, on Savannah, the fronts are a 17x8 with a 245/45/17 tire on there. And the back space is around 4.7 inches. Now, you'll notice that that's not a standard zero offset on the front, and we'll get into that, and there's reasons for that. On the rear of the car, we have a 17x9.5 with a 275/40/17 tire, and the back space on this is about 5.6. Now these are actually measured in offset as they come from American Racing. It's probably a little bit more high level than I want to get into in this episode here. But if you guys have questions about it, let me know, and I can do kind of like a wheel and tire 202 on this. But probably one of the most well-known issues with muscle cars is there's not a lot of information on wheels and tires, what will fit, what won't fit, things of that nature. And you know, one of the questions that I personally got asked on my Instagram when I was kind of talking about this video was, why is there not a single kind of spreadsheet or document out there that tells you what tire you can put on a car like this, front and rear, or a car like this, front and rear? Why isn't there just information out there that tells you you can put this tire, it needs to be this on this wheel? Well, the problem with that is variables. With a modern car, I got my Jeep out there, and obviously it doesn't have any cool wheels on it or anything like that. But on a modern car, the tolerances for production are so much tighter than they were with cars of this vintage. Not only that, you can pretty much guarantee, based on, kind of like a modern car instead of an old muscle car here, you know where all the suspension is, you know what track widths are, you have all that information. And so these companies that do aftermarket wheels, they have all this information and they know exactly what the wheel needs to be in order to fit properly. Now, unfortunately, with these old muscle cars, after 45, 50, 60 years, lots of stuff has been done to them. Lots of things have been changed. Now, most of these cars from the 50s, 60s, 70s, really up until kind of the early to mid 80s, depending on the vehicle, depending on the generation, they're kind of designed around what would be called a zero offset or a middle back spacing. So the barrel of the wheel would be equidistant front and rear of the mounting pad, meaning that there's no displacement left or right, inward or outward on the wheel. Now, Savannah here is actually a really great example. This car was drum brakes all the way around from the factory, so no discs, all drums. And the Pontiacs had the marketing saying wide track Pontiac. Back in the 60s, 70s, 50s, this was more than actually just a marketing gimmick. They actually did have different track widths than their Chevy counterparts. So in the case of a 1969 Firebird specifically, the rear axle hub to hub spacing was a full ½ inch wider than a 69 Camaro. So what that means is on each side, you had a ¼ inch that the axle mounting flange came outward this way. And if you actually look at the Pontiac wheels of that era, you actually look at the rallies, and these are the actual Pontiac produced wheels, not aftermarket stuff or anything like that. Their offset actually accounts for that. They move the wheel inward from the mounting base. So another thing that you have to keep in mind is that when you change brakes, so I've now got disc brakes front and rear, that also changes the track width. And your specific brake options may change it more or less. And so knowing that, these are just some of the variables. Now this, I have a Mosier rear end in this, so it's standard Camaro now, but with the disc brakes in the back, I've increased the track width from that point. So you actually have to calculate all of this. And what it boils down to is why there's not just one document out there that says you can do this is because there's just too many variables. Now, there are some of these documents out there that exist where people kind of put in what they've put on their car, you know, what size, what tires, what wheels, where they get them from, all that good stuff. ProTouring.com has a list in their wheel and tire section that's actually pretty good. But the problem is, once again, no two cars are exactly alike anymore because of what's been done to them. On my car, that's aftermarket. This is aftermarket. The wheel tubs in the car have actually been changed as well. All of that stuff that had to come out for rot. It's all different, right? It's not OEM stuff, it's repop stuff. So things change. And on top of that, hopefully you can see this. So my wheel lips here, I had trimmed when the car was in the body shop. So all that long-winded to basically say this car is quite a bit different than it would have been as a standard 1969 Firebird. And so while I can tell you that it has a 17 by 9.5 wheel with a 275 section width tire, 275/40/17, and it has about 5.61 inch backspace on it, what works for this car may not work for your car. And that's why it's so important to kind of understand how to measure what you're trying to do. Now, if you go to American Racing's website and you look up a set of torque thrust wheels for a 1969 Camaro, for instance, they'll give you something that fits. But what you'll find is that it's very conservative. And what you'll probably find most often with almost any old muscle car is that they're going to give you a 7 or an 8 inch wheel with up to like a 235 section width tire on a 0 offset. And the reason that they can do this is most everything, with some exceptions of some early stuff, you know, like the early Tempest cars, they don't like much tire in the rear because of how the inner fender wells are built, things of that nature. But you can typically get away with a 0 offset wheel the skinnier you make it. And that would be front and rear. The fronts on these cars are a little bit more problematic. And so that's what you're going to find. You're just going to find basic information about, well, this wheel will fit. And the reason that they don't push that is because, put yourself in their shoes. You say, oh yeah, I'm going to sell you this 18 by 9.5 inch wheel. You're going to put a 275 tire on it, and then you're going to put it on your car, and it's going to be a 0 backspace, and all of a sudden it doesn't fit. You're either rubbing on the inner fender well, you're rubbing on the outer lips of the fenders. And here's the problem: once the tire's been mounted to the wheel, you own that wheel. No wheel manufacturer will take a wheel back after a tire's been mounted on it. So what happens is then they get bad reviews, or they get angry customers that say, well, you sold me this wheel, you said it would fit, it doesn't fit. It's kind of an issue. So that's why kind of knowing how to measure a wheel in your wheel well is really important. And it's also why you don't have a lot of information out there that exactly just tells you you can put this wheel on this car in this size. So the question then becomes, how do you get the most wheel in your muscle car? And there's some things that you have to take into account. So the first thing that you have to take into account, if I can get up in here, is how much area you have in the wheel well itself. So you have to measure from your inboard to your outboard to figure out exactly how much space you can have. And now obviously if you've got 13 inches of space, you can't put 13 inches of tire in there. You have to have space front and rear so that the tire can move, articulate, and remember, everything on the suspension is going to move in an arc. As this comes up into the car, the wheel will arc this way. As the car goes into droop on this side, the wheel will fall away, and it will do so in an arc. So you have to think about the movement of the suspension, and then the other thing that you have to think about is parts of your suspension as well. So if I get under here again, one of the things that you'll notice, we have the shock mount is actually inboard of the barrel of the wheel on this. So with a 17-inch wheel on a 69 Firebird or a 69 Camaro, the way that the shocks mount, if you go with a 15-inch wheel or some 16-inch wheels, you actually lose space simply because you have to account for that drop flange right there for the shock mounting. And so because of that, you can't actually get as wide of a wheel in there. So with these cars in general, the first generation Camaros and Firebirds, when you go to wider tires, you will pretty much always see a minimum of a 17-inch wheel, and that allows the shock mount to actually suck up into the barrel of the wheel, gaining you space for the wheel to come in further. So if you go with a 15-inch wheel and you want to stay with more of a traditional look on these cars, it does limit what you can and can't put on the car because of some of those suspension issues. And in the front, the same thing, the tie rod ends on the front are going to have contact issue with wide tires as well. So all these things you need to think about. So we talked about measuring the width and how much you have available in the wheel well. From there, once you have that information, the general rule of thumb is that you want 1 finger width, so about ½ an inch on either side. So let's say that you have 13 inches of room, so take ½ an inch each side. The section width of your tire needs to be no greater than 12 inches. Then from there, what you need to do is you need to figure out where your mounting hub is in relation to the total width of your wheel well. And the best way to do that is just to use a bunch of rulers and straight edges, get in there and actually, move around a little bit and find where your spots are that work well for you. And with that, you can find your necessary backspace or offset. Okay, so let's say that you already have a wheel on the car and you want to plus size it. Maybe you want to make it wider, or maybe even want to downsize it, although that's not as big of an issue. There are tools online that you can actually, if you know the wheel's specs, so you know how big it is, you know what the offset or the backspacing is, you know what tire is on it, you can actually play around with these tools, and I'll put my favorite one in the description, a link to it. And you can see as you upsize both tire and wheel, or you change backspacing, you can see what happens with where the wheel is going to fit in the wheel well. And that's actually how I managed to do this one, is I used those tools with a set of wheels that were already on it. So that's the basic idea with measuring for this, and there's unfortunately no real way around for these old cars not measuring, unless you just don't want to go very aggressive. If you're okay with 235-inch tire on an 8-inch wheel, go and buy kind of whatever you want. A lot of it'll have zero offset, and you won't typically have to worry about it no matter what. There are some situations where that could be an issue. On this car, we have 0 offset wheels front and rear, and because of how low the car is, there are some issues in the front. But if you have a near stock or a mildly modified muscle car, 8-inch wheel with a 235 section width tire is generally going to be okay. Now, the other question that I get asked on this car a lot is it mini tubbed? And no, this car is not mini tubbed. I can actually show you. Let's open up the trunk here. As we get in here, as you can see, this car is not mini tubbed. These are the factory tubs in this car. And so about the most that I can fit on my specific car with my suspension setup and my rear end and my brake setup is this 275 on a 9.5-inch wheel. If I really wanted to really be careful about how I drove it and possibly use some very thin spacers to kind of move the wheels in the wells on each side to really get to perfection, I might be able to get a 285 tire. But it's just not worth it to do that, at least to me anyway. If you just have a show car, that's one thing, and it gets trailered to its spot, then there's a lot more than you can do versus if you're driving all over the place, right? So the question remains, do you have to mini tub these cars to get big wheels on them? Well, the answer is no, but also yes. I think with most early first gen F-bodies, a 275 on a 9 or a 9.5-inch wheel is more than likely possible as long as you nail the back spacing on it, and as long as the tire that you are running is kind of within spec. And what I mean by that, there are known some tires run wide for their section width, some tires run narrow. For instance, BFG's which is what's on here right now, they kind of run true to size. Nittos tend to run narrow for their size. So it really kind of depends. And if you know you want to run a specific tire, it's almost better to buy that tire first and put it up there and make sure it fits in there before you even buy a wheel or mount it on the wheel. Because again, once a wheel has been mounted, or once a tire has been mounted on a wheel, it's yours. So it really comes down to what you want. Do you want or need 315 to 335 section inch tires on a car like this? Is a 275, 255? How much driving are you going to be doing? How much, in parking lot driving are you going to be doing? How are the roads? Remember, you have to think about the articulation of the suspension. And so you have to think about the movement as well. So, the car will move this way, the car will move this way. And all of that movement is going to affect how and where a tire may or may not hit a piece of suspension, a piece of bodywork. So there really is just no way around getting in there, seeing what will fit physically, and then making decisions based off of that. So if you're okay with a 275 tire, you can probably get away without mini tubbing. Anything over that, you're going to have an issue where, in my opinion, you should be mini tubbing these cars at the very least. It's also going to depend on what type of suspension that you have in here. So if you look under the car here, Savannah still has leaf springs on this. Well, leaf springs pretty positively locate the axle and don't let it move laterally all that much. There's going to be some deflection, there always is, but it's not much. Nothing like on a car like this that has a converging four-link in it, which is going to allow the axle to move this way much more. And so that's actually one of the reasons why these cars from the factory have bigger wheel tubs in them, because they actually have to make sure that, rubbing is not happening there. So with a leaf spring car, you can get away with a little bit more from that standpoint, but they do tend to articulate a little bit weird. And anything with a solid axle, remember, anything that's happening on one side is automatically going to happen on the other. If you have an IRS or on the front where they're not actually attached to each other, things are a little bit different. You can get away with more or less in certain circumstances. So unfortunately, this is kind of something that there's a science to it, but it's also an art, and it takes a lot of research and kind of development into what your car has before you can make a decision on what can or cannot be put into your specific car. And just as an example on my car, the axle, when actually shot on a modern alignment rack versus the front end, is actually very center. It's just like 0.1 inch off is all to this side a little bit. But what happens, and I talked about this earlier, the tolerances of these old cars just is not as tight. So this side here, I have less space outward than I do on this side, and I have more space inward on this side here. And what that does is I do get a little bit of rub on the driver's side in large undulating, if you're coming off of the street onto a parking lot or a ramp or something that articulates the rear significantly, it will rub the inside of the inner fender well on the driver's side. And that brings up a good point, because when you're looking at measuring your wheels and what you want to get, it's okay to err less on the outboard lip than inner. So what happens is, if this wheel is moving up into the fender well, the wheel is going to be arcing. So it's going to arc away from this lip right here. Now, if this wheel is moving down in droop, what happens is you can see this lip, even though the arc will bring this closer, by the time it actually gets anywhere near, the top of the wheel is actually under the lip anyway. So in that situation, it's actually better to err on moving the wheel outward a little bit more than inward a little bit more. But there are, again, situations, I'll bring this car up for instance. The way that the Chevelles inner wheel wells are designed, they're not kind of squared off like this. They kind of do this. And so as the wheel moves outward, it has a tendency, it actually reduces the amount of space that it has in the wheel well. And that's what we've had issue with this car. When we put disc brakes on it, the track width in the front changed by about 1.5 inches, so about 3/4 of an inch on each side. And the wheels, being a zero offset wheel, don't take that into consideration. And so they've been pushed out so far that with how low this car is to the ground, we have some issues with space in the wheel well from that standpoint. So all things to consider, but take your time on the wheel and the tire, because the wheel and the tire makes the car. Nothing ruins a car like the wrong stance and the wrong wheels and tires. People will say, beautiful car, wrong wheel setup. So it's important to take your time on some of this stuff. So I've been a little long-winded, but if you have any questions that I didn't really cover, or if you need kind of like specific information, definitely put a comment in there, ask a question, I'll respond to you. And I hope this has been helpful for you guys, because everybody wants to know the biggest meat they can get on their muscle car. And unfortunately, the fact of the matter is that you got some legwork to do. So as long as you take the time to actually measure things, be mindful of where your suspension pieces are, be mindful of how much room you have in the wheel well itself, you'll be able to get into something that is, fits your car and actually looks really good as well. Not just something you just picked off the shelf and it looks like you picked it off the shelf because of that. So I will put a measurement guide as well in the description. And if you have any questions, please comment below. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope I wasn't too long-winded, but that you got something out of it. Thanks everybody. Have a great day. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Take care.